Hi there. Welcome to Bible/Chat. Hi, guys. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
What we're trying to do is make this as awkward as possible. No, we had a really good question that came up. Got this from another one of the young adults. To protect his name, we'll pronounce it in a we'll say it in a different language. Yeah. His name is James.
James.
James. He's a great guy. We love James. His question is actually an incredibly helpful question. Very. So, all of us come to Christ at different points in our life. All of us interact with the world and unbelievers in different ways. What does it look like? What are maybe some frameworks or categories or ways of thinking about how we should interact with unbelievers? Like, what does friendship with an unbeliever look like? Is it just like, here's the gospel, if you don't like it, I'm done with you? Do we care for that person? What does it look like? So maybe some of those, and then obviously people who maybe we were friends with prior to our conversion, and then you have someone who you might have been very close friends with, in fact, and then you find yourself saved, and then you say, well, what does that look like? Am I still friends with them? But obviously our friendship has changed because maybe we don't do the same things, but what should I do? So any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you how not to interact. And Kim will tell you how to interact.
There you go.
But I think that you can fall into that pitfall of thinking that because someone is an unbeliever, your interaction with him or with her should be completely non-existent, or it should be only gospel.
Yeah.
And we have met people that have said, like, I show a great relationship with so and so, but they're unbelievers. So not long I remember hearing someone telling me that a family member was an unbeliever, so they had no relationship with that person.
Yeah.
And that's sad. That's very, very sad. You should have a great relationship with them, even if they're unbelievers.
Yeah.
So obviously you need to have a relationship with them, but we can fall into the other pitfall of saying, look, my only relationship with that person is the gospel. So if it's a sibling, if it's a cousin, or if it's a good friend, hey, all I'm going to talk to this person is about the gospel. And I think that again, it's a hindrance to having a relationship, especially because this person is not seeking God.
Yeah.
No one seeks God.
Yeah.
This person might humor you, or you might be kind of white noise to them after a while. But
it sort of sours the gospel.
Yeah, it does, because every chance you get, there's always that opportunity to just drop that, hey, I'm struggling with this job. Well, if you had Christ, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jesus juking people.
Yeah. Jesus juking people, exactly.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't interact in those two ways. One of them would be non-interaction, and the other one would be gospel-only interaction.
Exclusive,
or exclusive.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Good. That's on the one side of like the sort of like the abandonment side.
Yeah.
Like we used to be friends, but now the only thing we have is that we can relate to is the fact that they're an unbeliever.
Well, and we met people who have said that, right?
Yeah,
hey,
totally.
I have nothing to say to them except for the gospel.
Yeah. Well, that might be a little overboard.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Two passages that come to mind. One's 1 Corinthians 15:33, I think, where it says, "Don't be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals."
Yeah.
Where it's like, you want to be cautious, right? Like, I think the reason this is a good question is like there is tension, and we just want to be able to explain it and see the right, way to balance it. So Paul has to say, don't be deceived. I guess he feels the need to say that because apparently it's easy to be deceived. And there might be someone who was really good friends in unrighteousness with someone who's an unbeliever, and then they get saved, and it's like, well, they come to a choice of, is it my friendship or is it Christ that's more important to me? And he's trying to say, well, he gives us a principle to help us say it's Christ over friendship, and we shouldn't be deceived into thinking like, oh, we can just keep that relationship the same.
Yeah.
But actually, I think like the Christians should have an optimistic outlook that relationship can actually get better.
Totally.
Like we can actually,
absolutely.
Like the Christian then becomes the driver in some ways in that relationship because they have found and they've been brought to see the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
And as a friend, you want to share that with your friend. And I think what Paul says in Colossians 4:5 and 6, walk in wisdom towards outsiders. So he's clear, like this person's an outsider in the community, but he says walk in wisdom towards them. So there's a relationship towards the outsider. And he says redeeming the time. which is to say we should have a mindset to get the most out of that experience, like to redeem the time, to get a return on that investment that we have, and rather than just tooling around like we used to, or fooling around like we did in high school, or whatever it is, to actually have intentionality there, and intentionality that's biblically driven because it's wisdom. And then he says, let your words always be with grace, seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should answer each person. So I think obviously a gracious demeanor. I would caution someone away from having a cautious demeanor, towards someone where it's like you kind of feel like you're, an animal.
Always side-eye.
Is there a hunter somewhere? You're,
fight or flight.
You're like suspicious of these people, but to know, they're different, right? But to engage in that, in a wise way, and be gracious towards them. Understand them. And I think it's cool too, like, let's say surfing, for example, like the winds and the waves obey God, like it's God's world. God brings waves. He invented surfing. These are things that my God made these things. And so I can actually go and participate in that. It's not worldly. And so in one sense, I would go and do those kinds of things maybe. And, if the opportunity presents itself, like call them to a greater enjoyment of those things, to where totally. It's like, hey, there's really good food over here. You should have some. And so where it's not always just combative, but if it is combative, even like Paul in Acts 14, I think he says like, how long will you make crooked the straight ways of the Lord? It's like a super like piercing rebuke, but it's how long, which is like his heart is like, stop, like come here, come to the better straight ways of the Lord, and so I think we want to make it hard for non-Christians to think we don't love them.
Totally. That's really good. So like love there as the center, as like the center driving thing, that love is going to participate in things that it's able to, where it's like, hey, surfing's a totally innocuous event. God made the world. It's awesome. You can totally go do that. Like whatever you do after surfing, you might have to be wise and careful with, where you're not stepping into unrighteousness. But you can be friends in that scope of righteousness, and then just say, I'm not doing that. Being cautious with those things. So love does both. Love says, I can absolutely participate in this. I can never participate in this because that would be evil. Right. That's super helpful. Those are both really good. So not distancing yourself, but actually coming toward that person in love to the extent that you're able. Having intentionality, turning your brain on, and like totally engaging. And then not always just saying the only thing I'm going to talk to you about is Christ. Though that's good to talk about Christ, but that's not the only thing we're going to discuss. So the two texts that came to mind for me too, one is 1 Peter 3, right? Be ready always to give an answer to those who ask of the hope that's in you. So in that case, I would say, like, if you say, hey, I'm totally willing to surf, I'm not willing to do something after surfing that would be sinful. I'll surf, I won't do this thing. Someone's going to say, why don't you do this anymore, right? 1 Peter 4, like the Gentiles say, why don't you continue in the things that you were doing? And you say, well, I can't do that anymore. Well, why not? And then you have an open door for the gospel presentation there. So your own life of righteousness is actually the clearest picture that will open the door for gospel conversations, instead of just being like, I'm just going to hit you with it. And the other text that came to mind is 2 Corinthians 6. In verse 14, he says, do not be bound together with unbelievers. So that might be the other fence on the outside. So this is wisdom in the middle. We have the one fence on this side. Don't reject people and turn away from them completely, or just make it like gospel only. The other fence on the other side, where all this wisdom of like being careful with them and your language and that stuff. The other fence would be, don't partner up with them in unrighteousness. Like you have people that are like, hey, we're going to go do this thing, and it's all about this unrighteous act or these unrighteous things. You should come and participate with us. You're like, well, they're my friends. I should probably go do that. No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't partner up with them in those things. You can say, hey, I'll get together with you guys afterwards if you want to go have a meal, because I can eat with a clear conscience. I can't do that stuff with a clear conscience. So don't bind yourself to them on one side, and don't reject them completely on the other side. And then in the middle, we just say, well, just be wise. Be wise with your words. Be wise with your actions. Be careful. And live a life where people ask you, what is the hope that's inside of you? What do you have going on inside of you that's different? Because you're clearly different than we are. You're different than you used to be. Help us understand. And like you're happier than they are. You know, like, and to shout out one guy in my care group, he was just saying he went to some event, and everyone was going to go out, get drunk afterwards. It was for something at work. And he was like, no, I'm going to go home to my family, know, and people in that work atmosphere, they, talk about like, oh, the wife, and all this stuff, and it's all like derogatory, but he's like, I love going home. I love
I love like not getting drunk. I love it, and I think
I feel infinitely better.
And that's a way of loving that person. Is like, hey, I found something better. Like God showed me this, and this is sweet. I want you to have it too. rather than just such a stiff arm.
Totally.
But like you're denying what they're doing and saying no, I'm going to stay here is a way of loving them.
Yeah, totally.
Just showing that there's an invite with it too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super good. Well, thanks, you guys. That's super helpful. This is a great question. Hope that's helpful for you. If you have any questions on this topic or any topic, you can always email us at info@faithbibleoc.org. Thanks so much.